The Golden Compass, Bolvangar Lights. The fact that the Egyptian had heard or seen nothing of Mrs. Coulter worried about Goram and Janfa more than they let Lyra know, but they weren't to know that she was worried too. Lyra feared Mrs. Coulter and thought about her often and various Lord Asriel as now. Father Mrs. Coulter was never mother. The reason for that was Mrs. Coulter demons, the golden monkey who had filled Pantalaimon with powerful loathing and who Lyra felt had freed into her secrets, and particularly the altimeter. It was silly to think otherwise. The spy fly proved that if nothing else, but when an enemy did strike, it wasn't Mrs. Coulter the Egyptian had planned to stop and arrest their dogs, repair a couple of sledges, and get all their weapons into shape for the assault of Volvangar. Janfa hoped that Lysik's course by might find some ground gas to fill his smaller balloon and go up to the spy out the land. However, the aeronaut attended to the condition of the weather as closely as a sailor and said there was going to be a fog, and sure enough, as soon as they stopped, a thick mist descended Lee's course by. Knew to see nothing from the sky, so he had to content himself with checking his equipment. True, it was in meticulous order, then checking his equipment. True, it was all in meticulous order. Then, with no warning at all, a volley of arrows flew out of the dark. 3 Egyptian men went down at once, and died so silently that no one heard a thing. Only when they slumped clumsily across the dog traces, or lay unexpectedly still, did the nearest man notice what was happening. And then it was already too late, because more arrows were flying at them. Someone looked up, puzzled by the fast irregular knocking sounds that came from up and down the line as arrows heartled into wood of frozen canvas. The first to come to his wits was Janfa, who shouted orders from the center of the line. Cold hands and stiff limbs moved to obey as yet. More arrows flew down like rain, straight roads, rain, steep, which that. Lyra was in the oven and the arrows were passing over her head. Pantalaimon heard before she did and became a nearer and knocked her over, making her less of target, brushing snow wall to her eyes. She rolled to try and see what was happening, for the semi-darkness seemed to be overflowing with confusion and noise. She heard the mighty roar and the clang scrape or lurk Bernison's armor or just leap fully clapped over the sledges into the fog, and that was followed by screams, snarling, crunching, and tearing sounds, great smashing blows, cries of terror, and roars of fury as he laid them waste. But who was that? Lyra had seen no enemy figures yet. The Egyptians were swarming to defend the sledges, but that made them better targets, and their rifles were not easy to fire in gloves and mittens. She had only heard 4 or 5 shots as against the gristless knocking rain of arrows, and more men fell every minute. Oh, Janfa, she thought in anguish, you didn't force this and I didn't help you. But she had no more than a second to think that, for there was a mighty snarl for Pantalaimon, and something another demon heartled at him and knocked him down, crushing all the breath of Lyra herself, and then hands were hauling at her, lifting her, stifling her cry with foul-smelling mittens, tossing her through the air into another arms, and then pushing her flat down into the snow again, so that she was dizzy and breathless and hard all at once. Her arms were hauled behind till her shoulder cracked, and someone lashed her wrists together, and then a hood was crammed over her head to muffle her screams, for screaming she did endlessly. Lurek, Wilson, help me. But could he hear? She couldn't tell. She was hard this way, and that crashed onto hard surface which they began to lurch and bump like a sledge. The sound that reached her were wild and confused. She might have heard Lurek Vinson's roar, and it was a long way off, and then she was jolted jolting over ground, arms twisted, mouth stifled, snuffing with rage and fear, and strange voices spoken around her. Fan, I'm here. Shh. I help you with Fred. Keep still. His mouth was tugged at the hood until her mouth was free, and she gave at the frozen hair. Who are they? She whispered. They look like Tartars. I think they eat Janfa. No, I saw him fall, but he should have been ready for this sort of attack. We know that, but we should have helped him. We should have been watching the altimeter. Hush pretend to unconscious. There was a whip cracking and a hole of rocks racing dogs from the way. She was being jerked and bounced about. Lara could tell how fast they were going, and through the strain to hear the sounds of battle. All she made out of forlorn valley of shots, muffled by the distance and the creak and rush and soft fall thuds in the snow were all there was to hear. They'll take us to cobblers, she whispered. The words shivered came to their mind, horrible, fear-filled. Lyra's body and Pantalaimon nestled close against her. I'll fight, he said. So will I. I'll kill them. So will Lorik when he finds out. He'll crush them to death. How far are we from Valvagar? Pantalaimon didn't know, but he thought it was less than a day's ride after they had been driving along for such a time that Lyra's body was informant. From cramp, the face slackened a little and someone slowly pulled up the hood. She looked up and found the thick faces. After a wolverine hood lit by flickering lamplight, his black eyes showed a glint of satisfaction, especially when Pantalaimon slid out of Lyra Anora to where his white ermine did in his. The man's demon, a big heavy wolverine, slurred back, but Pantalaimon didn't flinch. The man hauled Lyra up to the sitting position and threw her against the side of the sledge. She kept falling sideways because her hands were still getting tied behind her. So I tied her feet together instead and released her hands. Through the snow that was spinning and the thick fog, she saw no powerful this man, and the sledge driver too, how balanced in the sledge, how much at home in this land in the way of Egyptian warren. The man spoke, but of course she understood nothing. He tried a different language with the same result. Then he tried English. Your name? Pantalaimon bristled warningly, and she knew what he meant at once. So this man didn't know what she was. They hadn't kidnapped her because of her connection with Mrs. Coulter. So perhaps they weren't in the fate of their cobblers after all. Lizzie Brooks, she said. Lizzie Brooks, he said after her. We'll take you nice place, nice people. Who are you? Some white people's hunters. Where are you taking me? Nice place, nice peoples. You have fancy brownie for protection. No good. Ha ha. Before no good, we got you way anyway, he laughed loudly. Lara controlled herself and said nothing. Who those people? The man asked next, pointing back the way they had come. Traders. Traders. What they trade? For spirits, she said. Smoke lit. They smell smoke lit, but first, yes. He said something to this companion, who spoke back briefly all the time. The sledge was speeding onward, and Lyra pulled herself up more comfortably to try and see they were heading, but the snow was falling thickly, and the sky dark, and presently she became too cold to fear out any longer and lay down. She said, Pantalaimon cold. Feel each other's thoughts and tried to keep calm, but the thoughts of Janfa dead, and what had happened to Father Corp, and would Lorik manage to kill the other Samniads, and would they ever manage to track her down? For the first time, she began to feel a little sorry for herself. After a long time, the man shook her by the shoulder and handed her a strip of dried reindeer meat to chew. It was wrong and true, but she was hungry, and there was nourishment in it. After chewing it, she felt a little better. She slipped her head slowly. First, still she was sure that the matter was still here, and then carefully withdrew the five lighting and slipped it down into her forward. Pantalaimon crept into the mouse and pushed it as far down as he could, tucking in under the bottom of her reindeer's skin. When that was done, she closed her eyes, fear had made her exhausted, and soon she slipped easily into sleep. She woke up, then the motion of the sledge changed. It was suddenly smoother, and when she opened her eyes, there were passing lights dazzling above her. So bright she had to pull the food farther over her head before fishing out the grain. She was horribly stiff and cold, but she managed to pull herself upright enough to see that the sledge is driving swiftly between a row of high poles, each carrying a glaring and bright light. As she got her bearings, they passed through one open metal gate at the end of the avenue of lights and into a wide open space like a empty marketplace or an arena for some game or sports. It was perfectly flat and smooth and white, and about 100 yards across. Around the edge ran a metal fence. At the far end of this arena, the sledge halted. They were outside the law. It was hard to tell, but she had the impression that tunnels connected one part of the building with another tunnel hub under the snow. At one side, a stout metal mast had a familiar look, so she couldn't say what it reminded her of. Before she could take much more in, the man in the sledge cut through the cord around her ankles and hauled her out truly while the driver shouted at the logs to make them still. A door opened in the building a few yards away. An barrack light came overhead, swiveling to find them like a searchlight. Lyra's captor thrust her forward like a trophy, without letting go. In the same language, and Lyra saw his features. He was not a Samoyed or a Tartar. He could have been a Jordan scholar. He looked at her, in particular in Pantalaimon. The Samoyed spoke again, and then one from Valvarkar said to Lyra, "You speak in English?" "Yes," she said. "Does your daemon always take that form?" Of all the expected session, Lyra could only gape, but the Pantalaimon answered it is his own fashion by becoming a falcon, and launching answered it his own fashion becoming a falcon. He himself from her shoulder at one daemon, a large marmot which struck up the Pantalaimon with swift movement and spat of her circle passed on swift wings. "I see," said the man in a tone of satisfaction of Pantalaimon. Returning to Lyra's shoulder, the Simon men were looking expectant, and the man with Balvangar nodded and took off smitten to reach into a pocket. He took out a drawstring first and counted out a dozen heavy coins in the hunter's hands. The two men checked the money and then stowed it carefully, each man taking half. Without backwards glance, they got in the sledge, and the driver cracked the whip and shouted at the dogs, and then sped away across the white arena into the avenue of lights, gathering speed until they vanished into the dark beyond. The one was opening the door again. "Come in quickly," he said. "It's warm and comfortable. Don't stand out in the cold. What is your name?" His voice was English one, without any except Lyra could name. He sounded like the sort of people she had met at the Mrs. Coulter, smart and educated, important. "Lizzie Brooks," she said. "Come in, Lizzie. We'll look after you here, don't worry." He was colder than she was, even if she's done outside the far. As longer he was impatient to be in a warm again, she decided to fly slow and dim-witted and reluctant and dragged her feet as they stepped over the high threshold into the building. There are two doors with a wide space between them so that not too much warm air escape. Once they are through that inner doorway, Lyra found herself sweltering in the swim unbearable heat and had to fall off in the force and push back her hood. They were in a space about 8 feet square with corridors to the right and left, and it thrown her the sort of reception desk you might see in a hospital. Everything was brilliantly lit with the glint of shiny white surfaces and stainless steel. There was the smell of food in the air, familiar food, bacon and coffee, and under its faint perpetual hospital medical smell, and coming from the walls all around was a slight humming sound, almost too low to hear, the sort of sound you had to get used to or go. Pantalaimon at her ear, a goldfish chinch now whispered, "Be stupid and dim. Be really slow and stupid." Adults were looking down at her. The man who brought her in, another man wearing a white coat, a woman in a nurse uniform. English. The first one was saying, "Traders apparently, usually hunters, usually story. Some tribe as the far as could that Sister Clara would love to take little see her. Certainly doctors come with me." There said the nurse, and Lyra obediently followed. They went along a short corridor with doors on the right and the canteen on the left, from which came a clatter of knives and forks, and voice and more cooking smells. The nurse was about as old as Mrs. Coulter. Lyra dressed with a brisk blank, sensible air. She would be able to stitch a wound or change a bandage, but never to tell a story of her demon. And Lyra had a moment of strange chill when she noticed was a little white trotting dog, and after a moment she had no idea why it has chilled her. "What was your name, dear?" said the nurse, opening a heavy door. Lizzie. Just Lizzie? Lizzie Brooks. And how old are you?" 11. Lyra had been told that she was small for her age, whatever that meant. If I had never affected her sense of her own importance, but she realized that she could use the fact that to make Lizzie shy and nervous and insignificant, and shrank a little as went into the room. She was half expecting questions about where she had come from and how she had arrived, and she was preparing answers, but I wasn't only imagination. The nurse laughed. It was curiously as well. Paul Bunker might have been on the outskirts of London, and children might have been arriving all the time. For all the interest Sister Clara seemed to show, her fortunate little demon trotted along at her heels just as brisk and blank as she was. In the room they entered, there was a couch and a table and 2 chairs and filing cabinet, and a glass cupboard with medicines and bandages, and a wash basin. As soon as they were inside, the nurse took Lyra's outer coat off, dropped into the shiny floor. "Up with the rest, dear," she said. "We'll have quick little cloak to see you're nice and healthy. No frostbite of sniffles, and then we'll find some nice clean clothes. We'll pop you in the shower, too," she added, for Lyra had not changed or washed for days, and in the enveloping warmth that the becoming more and more evident. Pantalaimon fluttered in forces, but Lyra scalded him with a scowl. He settled on the couch as one by one all Lyra's clothes came off. To her resentment and shame, but she still had the presence of mind of conquer in an actual written and compliant. "And the manivals," Lizzie said, the nurse, and tied in herself with strong fingers. She went to drop it on the pile with Lyra's other clothes by stop feeling the edge of the audiometer. "What's this?" she said, and unbuttoned the clean oilcloth. "Just a sort of toy," said Lyra. "It's mine." "Yes, we won't take away from you, dear," said Sister Clara, unfolding the black velvet. "That's pretty, isn't it? Like a compass." "Into the shower with you," she went, footing the audiometer down and risking back a cold silk curtain in corner. Pantalaimon perched on the curtain rail. They were both conscious that themselves and dry, The nurse took their temperature, height, and put her on some skins before a note on clipboard. Then she gave Lyra some pajamas and a dressing gown. They are clean second-hand air about them. Lyra left very uneasy.